what was SB 684, SB 1123, and how does it affect developers or real estate investors right now?
SB 684 came into play, and that was going to allow you to basically subdivide lots into smaller lot sizes that weren't meeting necessarily all the zoning standards. It was meant to encourage development and housing, and I think that the subdivision piece is kind of essential because people want their own piece of dirt. And I think it incentivizes developers to build because they know they're not selling a site condo, they're selling houses fee simple. That works for people. So 684 made this a thing that you could do California wide. You could subdivide up to 10 units as long as it met either the underlying density or 30 DUA, which is known as Mullen density, whichever was higher. So you had to use the higher density on the site. And 684 was requiring that you use 100% of that density. The 684 was hitting these barriers. It was pushing sites over 10 units because of that 100% density requirement. And so if you got pushed over 10 units, you no longer qualified. So that's where the 2200 comes in because you wanted a lower density. So the modified law, which we now refer to as 1123, most people common parlance seems to be 684 is referring to multi-unit sites. 1123 is referring to single family sites, but it doesn't exactly work like that. 1123 modified the law that was written in 684. So, I mean, the law is now what the law is. But what 1123 did was a couple of key things. One, it made single family zoning eligible. And two, it put that 66% piece in there. So it added some flexibility to your density. So you could actually go lower density and not have your site pushed over the max and thereby disqualifying the site. The other thing that it did at the very end, there was what they call a trailer bill, and that allowed people to remainder parcels. So you could carve off a parcel from your primary lot and then use what you had on your primary lot to calculate your density and leave that other lot, which now can't be redivided per state law. It has to sit as its own separate parcel, and whatever applies there applies there.
All right, welcome to the episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Guys, this is the best podcast to learn about affordable housing investments. If you don't believe me, just ask ChatGPT. But today, I got Mr. Matt Baran on the podcast today. And when I first stumbled upon Matt's post, he's super active on Twitter, super active on LinkedIn, and he just invites a lot of great questions about the projects that he's working on. Specifically, how do you navigate all these Senate bills, right? We'll call them SBs here in California, specifically SB 684, SB 1123. I mean, I just can't keep my head wrapped around all these different numbers to even begin with. And here I see this guy answering the most detailed questions about how to get creative, how to get more density, how to get more units. And I was like, I gotta bring this guy on a podcast. So Matt, welcome to the podcast today, man. How you doing?
Thanks, I'm doing great. It's Saturday morning, and I'm doing really good for 8 a.m. on a Saturday. I'm going to try and match your energy level.
Well, I get so jazzed up whenever I talk about real estate, whenever I talk about affordable housing, and I was just super pumped. And this is where I got to give you some flowers, Matt. It's not a lot of people share this information widely. They accumulate this knowledge and they just keep that information to themselves. When you share all this information, so many people it's like a light bulb moment for them. They're thinking, wow, Matt really knows what he's doing. Wow, someone's actually pulling back the current and showing me what's possible. So let's just start from the beginning, Matt, man. Like, how did you get into this world of real estate in the beginning?
Yeah, the one thing I want to say, though, is, to your point, that I was reading something just the other day, I think it was somebody's tweet or post or whatever, and it was that, a kind of all boats rise mentality. Like, if you surround yourself by successful people and you help people around you succeed, it puts you in a place where you're set up to succeed too. And I've seen that with so many successful people and developers that I'm around. They don't try to keep things from each other. They share information and they share their stories and they gain from others and they give back to others. So I think that's super important to do. I'll give you the kind of brief version, but I finished architecture school way back in 96 and went and worked for a series of architecture companies all the way up to right around 20, I would say 5 or 6. I won my first AIA award and decided that, I was tired of what everybody else was doing. And I went back to grad school in 08. And then right around that time, I found a piece of dirt in Oakland. And, I got into a bunch of grad schools. The one that I picked was Berkeley because I wanted to work on this project. So I had kind of pulled some money out of the house that we had and connected with a developer and was finishing my master's degree and doing this deal at the same time. And the deal came online in January of '09, which anybody that's been around for a minute, that was not a good time. So, we got out pretty clean. I mean, we actually managed to sell the house and didn't lose money, but didn't make money really either. But it connected me with another developer, and that developer had to keep doing stuff at that time. And so they were flipping houses, and I just started working with them. And that developer was extremely prolific in Oakland. And so we were just running with all these flips. And then that turned into bigger ground up deals. And so we were doing some of the first permits in Oakland back in like 2010. And that's really when I kind of put my inception date for the company. So back in
Wow.
2010, I got kind of things going there. And it was really more of an architecture thing than it was a development thing. I was doing development deals, or I was thinking to do development deals, but there weren't really any to be done. I mean, I wanted to do ground up stuff, and there really wasn't any of that to do. So we started doing these mini lot splits at that time. That was a big thing in Oakland, was you could get this higher density than was existing. I mean, there were all these lots that looked like single family lots, but they were really multifamily lots. And Oakland had this kind of buried provision that went back to the Jerry Brown days. And you could subdivide lots in substandard sizes. And we just jumped on that. And then all these developers started coming in, a lot of USC MRED guys. And I went to SC and I kind of connected with them, and they saw what I was doing. And we were doing these, second units in the back of these lots. And people are like, what is that thing in the backyard? Like, why are you building houses in people's backyards? Like, they didn't understand. And the architecture was a little different, but then they saw what they were selling for and they were like, I want in on that. So we were just skyrocketing from that point out. We just did dozens of these projects, these small lot subdivisions. So then come whatever it is now, 15 years later, Oakland has eliminated its small lot subdivision provisions. Most cities didn't have them. We were doing site condos in some places. And now it's state law. I mean, we did many other things along the way. This is something I've been talking about a lot lately, is that past history and what we're doing now. But I mean, we've done podium projects. We've done lab kind of TI projects. We have entire kind of what I'd say departments in our small studio, but people that specialize in those other product types. But the most exciting thing has been seeing what we were doing 15 years ago finally come to the fore in California statewide. And now we're picking up projects all over the state.
Wow. Man, I mean, I want to take us back a little bit to that first deal in January '09 when you took that first step. And even though you didn't lose any money on that deal, Matt, what did that do for like your confidence? Because I want people to understand sometimes the first deal or the first project that you do, it's not to become a multimillionaire, but rather
No.
sometimes it just gives you the confidence that you can do this. It's like a proof of concept even. So emotionally, how did you feel after you got out of that first deal in 2009?
I mean, I was excited. I mean, it was definitely a prototype on many levels. And I mean, I was super proud of what I had done, because for years, like a lot of people, I wanted to do development deals, but I just, didn't have the right configuration of capital and ability and resources. And I'll tell you, one of the things, this developer that I connected with. I mean, she helped me a ton. And she partnered with me. She gave me access to her subs. I GC'd that deal myself, and actually the subsequent deals we did as well. So we've done a few deals along the way after that, and they got a little bigger. But yeah, I think that being out there and putting it together, hiring subs, really understanding what it took to build the thing and develop it, like every little piece, right? You learn. And even though it wasn't even just for all my deals, it was for the service that I would bring to clients. But that knowledge is really essential. But I was very fortunate to have some mentorship. She introduced me to the bank help, we got the construction loan together. So that was all really helpful. And it's hard to replicate, right? Some of this is just pure luck. Like finding that lot, it's a $3,000 option. I didn't really know what I was doing. So,
but you made the move. You bet on yourself and you went there, and you put yourself in a position so that you got a piece of dirt. And then more importantly, you also got to meet that mentor and that developer partner, because even though you got through the first deal, you didn't get discouraged by the economy. You said, hey, let's finish this. Let's finish this project. And I bet that mentor of yours said, hey, this person's got it. Like, he's going to persevere. He's going to push through even when things get hard. And I think those are the qualities that anybody today, whatever they're working on, you're building your brand today. Whatever you're doing, that's part of your brand. Whatever you're not doing, that's also part of your brand. Means if you want to just sit back there and do nothing and hope that things come to you, that's part of your brand. But if you push through and you try to learn and you try to get with the people and you try to bring value to their lives, that's how you set yourself apart and put yourself in a position to earn these different opportunities. And that's exactly what you did, Matt. And the reason I say that, Matt, is because I hope my daughter listens to this episode one day and she listens to your story, Matt. And I get to tell her, hey, look, the first thing that you do, stop thinking about yourself. Stop thinking about me. Think about how can you be of service to another and do the best you can to your ability to put yourself in the best position, but help that person first. And I think that was such a good story. I just want to make sure I highlight that, because if my daughter listens to this episode, she better listen to that podcast.
My daughter will be listening to this episode. I'm going to play it for her after we're done. I'll tell you that. I'm going to make her watch it.
All right. So Matt, let's keep going, because then for the next 10, 15 years, your business has obviously blown up. When you think about where we're going, let me just start off with a very sort of broad question. Are you optimistic about where the state's going in terms of being more flexible with density bonuses? What are your thoughts there?
I mean, I may have become a bit cynical over the years. So whether optimism might be a strong word. I don't know, because I think that it's the state, but also, just governance in general, its tendency is to, that's what it's there to do, is regulate, right? And I feel like, somebody had asked on one of my posts the other day that, what do you think caused this dip in production? And CEQA lawsuits became really huge and blocking projects. And with the best intentions, all these regulations have really kind of strangled housing, especially in California. And I don't feel like governance has, somebody once said to me, if you ask a lawyer how to solve your problem, they'll say, file a lawsuit. If you ask an architect how to solve your problem, they'll say, design something. If you ask a regulator how to solve something, they'll say, regulate it, right? So that's what they're going to do. And I think that it's really interesting to watch the regulation fall away. I don't want to minimize that. It's been really positive, I think. But another article just came out about some of the data around what's happening right now. And it's not having as much of an impact as I think we'd all like. And I think that there is an economic piece that needs to fall into place. Once it does, when we were doing these 15 years ago, we didn't have the regulatory kind of pathway. And so once the economics kind of come together, I think you're going to see a massive rush and a lot of units coming online again, because it will be so much easier to get them done. But we still need some other pieces to fall in place. Mainly, I think, interest rates, which may be changing, looks like they're changing, and construction costs, which never really change. I think that they stabilize, but they don't go down. And so what does that leave? It leaves rents to go up, and nobody really wants that. But until you start building, they're going to steadily tick up, making it more profitable and hope, but if you can get a steady enough stream and maintain that stream, then the hope would be rents level off, but while it remains profitable for developers to build. And some of that is regulatory. That will keep margins higher. And I think people don't estimate, if you can cut regulatory in half cost-wise, that's the difference between $50,000 on a house or $100,000 in profit and not, because of all the fees and all the time.
And that adds up to a huge amount of dollars when some developers are trying to figure out, hey, is this deal going to be financially feasible? And I love how you kind of brought up there's like this like almost increase, this little wave that goes with the regulatory. It's like sometimes it goes all the way down, but then all of a sudden it kind of comes back up when people see a massive influx of people that might not be doing it correctly, right? We're not advocating for that. We're still advocating for safe, decent, affordable housing and increase in supply that's done correctly, just like kind of what you've been doing. So let me kind of get into a little bit of the weeds with you, Matt, because I think you reference SB 684, SB 1123. And I remember looking at one of your posts one time and you talked about the numbers 1452 and 2200. Let's start at a high level. Like, what was SB 684, SB 1123, and how does it affect developers or real estate investors right now?
The short version is SB 684 came into play, and that was going to allow you to basically subdivide lots into smaller lot sizes that weren't meeting necessarily all the zoning standards. It was meant to encourage development and housing, which is what it did in Oakland as well when it was originally conceived. And I think that the subdivision piece is kind of essential because people do want their own piece of dirt. And I think it incentivizes developers to build because they know they're not selling a condo or a site condo, they're selling houses fee simple. And just kind of societally, American dream, all that works for people. So 684 made this a thing that you could do California wide. You could subdivide up to 10 units as long as it met either the underlying density or 30 DUA, which is known as Mullen density, and whichever was higher. So you had to use the higher density on the site. And 684 was requiring that you use 100% of that density. And they were figuring this out as they were going, right? They were building the plane as it was taking off, I guess you could say, as we often do. And the 684 was hitting these barriers that it was pushing sites over 10 units because of that 100% density requirement. And so if you got pushed over 10 units, you no longer qualified. So the law was disqualifying projects just by its own nature of the calculation. Yeah, so that's where the 2200 comes in because you wanted a lower density. So the modified law, which we now refer to as 1123, most people, common parlance seems to be 684 is referring to multi-unit sites. 1123 is referring to single family sites, but it doesn't exactly work like that. 1123 modified the law that was written in 684. So, I mean, the law is now what the law is, but that's how people are kind of referring to those two things. But what 1123 did was a couple of key things. One, it made single family zoning eligible. And two, it put that 66% piece in there. So it added some flexibility to your density. So you could actually go lower density and not have your site pushed over the max and thereby disqualifying the site. The other thing that it did at the very end, there was what they call a trailer bill, and that allowed people to remainder parcels. So you could carve off a parcel from your primary lot and then use what you had on your primary lot to calculate your density and leave that other lot, which now can't be redivided per state law. It has to sit as its own separate parcel, and whatever applies there. I did a post about this recently with that triplex that I showed that could be a remainder to get to 13 units instead of 10. So you can remainder lots. So there's a lot more flexibility in getting these things done with the passing of 1123.
Ooh, okay. There's so much to unpack here,
Yeah,
Matt,
there's a
'cause
lot. I
I
mean,
love
it's
this.
like an alphabet soup of like complex interlocking things. And I mean, when you add in, an infill site with an existing house or an existing multi-unit building, I mean, it's these complex interplays of things that it takes some sorting, you know.
Well, let's talk about some terms. You said 30 DUA. What does DUA mean? What's that
Sorry,
stand for?
dwelling units an acre. 30
Got it.
dwelling units an acre. So you would take the whatever size your parcel was as a fraction of an acre or multiple acres. But I think there is an acreage limit on those bills. I just don't know off the top of my head what it is because we never hit it. We're always at like 0.2 acres or whatever, which means that we're at 0.2 of 32 DUA, right? But the way that translates is that 1452 translates into 30 DUA.
Got it.
You do the math and work backwards to get the square footage per unit on your lot. If I had a 14,520 foot square feet of area on my lot, then I divide that by 1452 and I'd get 10 units.
Yes, and that makes a lot of sense. Now, when you said 684 was requiring you to use 100% of the density, are we talking about the existing zoning that was in there? Can you explain that, what that meant?
So some sites, right, are super high. We'll refer to it. Every city has its different lettering system, but just most cities start with R. So if you say R1, R2, R3, R4, an R4 density is going to be a very small number that you're dividing in. So it's going to probably be less than that 1452, which results in a higher density. So some sites will go down to 1,000 feet a unit or 800 square feet a unit in really dense kind of corridors and things like that. So in some sites just don't work because you can't, they're zoned for multifamily, and getting it the size to a small enough number to fit 10 units. If it's 100 feet unit, let's say, for really high density area, then 10 units is 1,000 feet. You would never be able to do it. You wouldn't be able to subdivide the lot into, you'd hit the 600 square foot parcel size limit, which is another thing, before you'd hit the density. So you really have to look at both the underlying density and the 30 DUA and then see what works best. In some cases, you're going to go to that 2,200 to get the density down, but in some cases, you won't be able to get it down far enough to make the thing make sense.
Okay, I think I'm following what you're saying. Maybe if we were to take a look, let's think about the process, right? When you get a piece of land or you get a piece of dirt, let's do something really simple, right? Maybe it's a single family home with a nice big backyard there. How would you start applying all these stipulations to figure out, like, how do I figure out what is the max density I can get there, or whether or not even any of these legislation even applies? Like, how would you sequentially walk through that process when you're looking at a piece of land?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think, for people listening, right? I mean, one way to do this is to look at some of the stuff we've done. And there's like a density guide on our website that people can download, and you can kind of see the various configurations. But that's a good example. A lot of what we did was just 2-unit deals, right? Especially if you're getting started, it's more reasonable. Hard to find an empty lot. If you can find a lot with a single unit on it in multifamily zoning, which is the trick, like a low multifamily zoning. Because if you find a house on a lot in R1 zoning, in single family zoning, you can't do anything. I mean, you can do an ADU and a JADU, which is, that's a whole other line, is ADU stuff. But you can't do anything because the lot needs to be delivered vacant to do what we'll call 1123, or the house has to be uninhabitable. It can't have been rented in the last 5 years. So that's kind of a limiting thing on the single family side. If you find an empty lot, you're good. And we have a couple of those empty lot deals we're doing now. If you find a single family house in a multifamily zone, you're good. And we did a lot of those. And it ends up just being the house stays where it is. A lot of times it gets renovated, and then you divide off the back half of the lot and you build your second unit. You put an easement across the front lot to get either car access, which, a lot of these projects don't have to have parking, but we're doing parking anyway because the market demands it. Also, utility access. So that's a big one that people don't think about, is joint trench issues, wet and dry utility stuff, hookups. I think one of your questions was, what are some of the biggest misses? And I think a lot of times utilities and the cost of utilities don't get factored in. People say, what's construction cost right now? And you say 400 a foot. what does that even mean, right? What did it calc out to for us in the end? Was it $396.50 per foot? Or, where do you put all that other fee stuff? Like you look at soft costs and you'll put in all the consultants and permits, but people don't think about the utility hookup fees. Water EBMUD here is 40 grand a unit for water meters. So you do 3 units, now you're talking about $120,000 just for the hookups, plus whatever fees and design charges and everything else. So that's a big one. But yeah, the existing lot can be subdivided off. In the beginning, you could subdivide multiple units from one another. Now with the new law, you can no longer do that, but you can subdivide off existing residences and then you create additional subdivisions around it. So you could do 2 or 3 or 4, depending on the size of the lot.
When you say 2 or 3 or 4, you're talking about essentially turning that back lot into 2 or 3 or 4 units, but then you turn it into like a for sale type of condo arrangement. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, they're for sale fee simple. So you're just creating an easement across, just imagine you're working your way back and you just have a long access easement all the way back. The first thing we'll look at is what's the size of the lot? And then the second thing we'll look at is what's the existing condition and what can we do with that? Oftentimes it just means subdivide that off. And then you do the math. How many units can I fit on? So take that 14,520 square feet number and I divide it by 1452, I can fit 10 units. Will actually be subdivided off counting as 1, and then I can do 9 more. And so then I'm kind of looking at some other things. A lot of times that existing unit doesn't sit where it should, where you want it. The footprint's funky and, all that. So, okay, we'll tear off this dogtail and we'll lift it. In that first deal we did, there was an existing house. We lifted and moved over and moved back or up towards the front lot line. Just put it on rollers and rolled it around and then set it back down on a new foundation to clear out space to the back. And then you're kind of saying then, I'll start with maybe a 20 by 40 box and it'll be 1,600 square feet because it's often 2 stories, right? So you're in the neighborhood. 1,750 is the max footage. It grosses out higher because you don't count the walls. So, you could almost do more of a 50 by 20 to get to 2,000. And if you add in a little garage, that doesn't count against your square footage and you subtract the walls, you'll be in the neighborhood of 1,750. So I know that is going to be my building block. And it depends also on the site and does it want to be 25 by 25? But, these rectangles generally lay out bedrooms on the ends, circulation and bathroom core in the center. We used to call it the Baran studio all day because like a place that serves sandwiches and it's the same sandwich, they just have one. It was the all day because there's only so many ways to skin this thing, right? But that roughly gets you your building blocks. So then you start populating a site with those blocks. Now, how close together do they have to be? How can they extend over the drive aisle? Maybe you want more space. And so then I think what is really interesting, you had asked a question on the lead up to this about what is one of the mistakes people make in calculating. One of the mistakes is just dividing the lot by the number and saying, I can fit X number of units, right? That you never want to do that because you want to actually lay it out, see how it's going to work, because it might say you can have, let's say 10 units, but the site is kind of configured such that you can't get the parking in if you want parking, or you can't get air access, or it needs to be 3 stories or whatever, because the underlying zoning is more dense, the site's smaller. Like my 14,520 example, it only applies to Mullen density. If you have a site that's denser because of underlying zoning, you've got to fit more units on it. We're kind of looking at how the units relate to one another. Can we get light and air in them? Do they feel uncomfortable? And I think one of the mistakes people make, one, not doing some site analysis and just using the calculation, but 2, over-densifying. I think that what ends up happening is people put too much on the site, and then you don't have a quality product. And I think that that's one of the things we're running up against with cities where they're saying you have to meet this density. And we say, well, that's not going to sell. Like that's not going to be a good livable quality product. And they're saying, that's your problem. And we say, well, relax these standards. And they say, well, you're not hitting the maximum density, so we're not relaxing any standards. So you get these weird, one deal we were working on had a 20-foot front yard setback requirement. And when you lay out the units, they're this far apart from each other, and you have this big 20-foot setback in the front. The two neighbors were less than 20. Like, why are you enforcing this 20-foot setback? Well, that's the rules, So I think the challenge in some ways now is not being pushed into too much density, because for a developer, again, you want it to sell. You want it to have a certain amount of open space. Maybe you want it to have parking, even though you don't have to. In order for it to be marketable, you need some of these amenities that the law might not quite be allowing for. And that's where design comes in, right? I mean, like, how do we configure these things so that we make them livable? And we have this long track record going back now 15 years of strategies for protecting privacy, for providing open space, for getting light and air into units, while, still kind of packing in density.
Wow. That's such a great example of how when you require actually more density, it actually causes issues on the back end. It's like you're not creating a product that people want. And that's you're trying to go against the market. That doesn't make any sense, because look, I get that there's stipulations where they don't require parking anymore. But at the end of the day, guess what? You're probably going to want a spot for your car. I mean, it's a huge nuisance to drive the blocks 10 times looking for a parking spot. And I think that's a huge miss sometimes by folks, because even on a multifamily side, I've seen people build 100-unit buildings with no parking. And I said, where do you think all these people are going to go? We live in California. Most people don't take public transportation. And when you don't take into consideration what people want for their livelihood, people underestimate vacancy expense. And I'm just talking about rentals here. You think if someone opens another building across the street that's brand new that has parking, they're not going to leave your building to go across the street? And now your pro forma doesn't work anymore.
we all want to live in a world where everybody takes public transportation. I mean, I've shed cars, and we do take public transit, we bike, all that. But there are times when I need a car to take my daughter and her friends camping or whatever it is. I mean, and so until we have a perfect solution, then that's what you're going to have. And it's a bit of a, you're trying to encourage development, right? So you have to allow for the market in that equation. You can't just say, we're going to build this density, no parking. We're going to build this utopia before the infrastructure exists to support it. So you work in that direction, but you remain flexible. I mean, the same thing like with all the regulatory release, and we're going to get a flood of supply of market rate. But until we do, you still need affordable housing, deed restricted affordable housing. I think that's a thing.
I mean, Matt, you just brought us some great examples of how to navigate all this legislation, right? And earlier you mentioned a project that you did where you talked about how you got to remain your parcels. Can you explain to people, like, what did you mean? Like, why would someone carve out the parcel from the primary line? Like, what's the intention? What's the purpose? What's the rationale for that?
It's interesting. I think that, so you can actually carve off a parcel that has a multi-unit building and not have it hit your density count, right? So if you have a 10-unit apartment, you can remainder that parcel, and then what you have is your empty piece that you can then configure as we were discussing, right? Subdivide it in up to 10, all that. The thing that we've actually done recently is we did, with one client, find an empty R1 lot, which is good fortune, that had a house that had burned down a long time ago. And the thing about the lot was it was so big, I can't remember, it like 26,000 square feet, that it pushed our density up over 10. So we couldn't have done same thing. We couldn't have done because with R1 lot, now there's no underlying zoning. It's only Mullen density. So with the R1 lot, it's only Mullen density. You have to hit 66% of Mullen density. And we were getting pushed up over it. So what we ended up doing was carving off a lot that met all the regular lot size standards. So it met the lot width requirements, it met the lot size requirements, and then that lot just sits there. That's now a legal lot, and it can be developed in an R1 zone with 1 unit on it. And the balance of the site is what we could have put. I think we actually could have put up to 10 units. I mean, we went lower density in this case because when I showed it to the client, I'm like, here's what 10 units looks like. And again, using that 40 by whatever 20 footprint. And they said, well, it looks like barracks. And I said, yeah. And it's in a single family neighborhood. It's not going to fit. It's already going to be dense. So we ended up deleting 2 units to give that site space area back to the 8 that we maintained. Now we had 5-foot setbacks between the units. We still have a 20-foot setback because the important thing to note is that there are 4 things that a city can still enforce: open space, access, height, and front yard setback. So we still have to follow that sort of silly 20-foot front yard setback. I mean, again, in this case, we're looking at 8 units. They're 2 by 2 going back. The front is on one end. We have 20 feet there. And then as we go back, we've got 5 feet between the buildings. Now, even from an urban planning standpoint, would that not be better to have that 20 feet distributed between those units so that it felt more like it was blending into that context? You would think so, right? But those are the rules. So, that's what you have to follow. But I think it still works pretty well in this case. So going back to the question, that's an example of a remainder lot project we're working on right now in R1, creating an empty lot, not creating a lot with an existing apartment building on it.
Well, let me say it back to you because I want to make sure I followed your logic, right? So it's almost like you had this single family lot and you set off one piece of the lot so that it can get to that 1452, that 10 unit density. So
Right.
then the other lot is what you decide to do. Maybe it sounds like you're adding like 3 units on that one. So it's almost like that extra lot is like a single family with an ADU and a junior ADU.
You could do that. Yeah, you could do that.
So that's how you got to 11 units, but your max units would have been 13 because the first lot would have been 10 and then you have 3 in the front. Did I follow that correctly?
Well,
What did I miss?
I think we're mixing 2 different projects. So the one
okay.
the one that I had posted about was 13 and we
Got
did
it.
10 plus 3. This one, we're doing 8. We could have done 10, and it's really plus 1 single family house, which would have been 11. But that, you're right. Actually didn't even think about this. If they wanted to, they could build a house, an ADU, and a JADU in there because that's still allowed under single family zoning in that area. But
I like this. This is
yeah. So
exciting.
then, no, I mean, you can be creative and push density really hard, right? I mean, the other question right now is whether or not I think that it's left up to, and I have so much of the law memorized, but not all of it. But I think it's left up to local jurisdictions to decide whether ADUs will or will not count against your density. Like Berkeley decided that they don't. So you can add in ADUs in some cases. So in the case that we're talking about, I mean, the houses are too small really to do an ADU, but if you added a 3rd story or something and it made sense in that market, you could do 8 units plus 8 ADUs plus the single unit plus an ADU plus a JADU. And now you would be at 16 or 19 units
Whoa.
on a single family lot.
What?
Yeah, the 8 units in the first place on a single family lot to me is kind of
It's a
like,
lot.
but yeah, you can really push density. But again, I think there's this market versus ideal densities that we're kind of poking around at, trying to figure out how to strike a balance. I've seen a lot of people leave density on the table because, and for good reason, the units will sell for more because they're better designed, more space, that kind of thing. So,
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So we just talked about you looking at a lot, you look at the underlying density, you try to figure out what you can do with the property. What's sort of the next step in the process that you typically follow? Are you looking at utilities next to see if it's financially feasible? How do you approach the next step in the process of valuing a piece of dirt?
You had sent that question and I was thinking about the answer. Like, how do you know that you're going to be able to, it's going to be financially feasible with all these infrastructure components? And I said, you don't. You have to assume,
Great
you,
answer.
you have to assume worst case scenario. So you assume that you're replacing everything. Okay, you can go down and say, do I have to underground utilities? The project that I'm talking about, it's in Santa Ana, and they said every project has to underground utilities. So, okay, you now know that. But certain things like that existing sewer lateral, you can go out and get an inspection, but that costs money. So you just assume you're going to have to replace it. You're going to have to add in laterals for every new unit. You're going to have to get power to them. You're going to have to get water to them. You're going to have to get sewer. You can go down to the city and see where the lines run. There's a sewer running down this street, not that one. And so you've got to tap in and have a way. Often it's through the same access easement that you're using for cars. So you're just putting two trenches and running your stuff all the way through. You just have to make sure you have space and a clear line to an existing public utility. So, I mean, to some degree, you can check on all these things, but I think it's really difficult to know exactly what's going to happen with, especially existing conditions like a underground sewer lateral. You don't know unless you're doing inspections, and those can become costly.
You can try to figure out like, hey, I know there's power because I'm in the city nearby. You just don't know how far you have to go. And especially if
Yeah,
you're
I
ever
think
on a slope, right? That makes things even more complicated. You got to get water uphill.
Yeah, but you can check on, its existing condition. I think it's probably one of the biggest misses is not check. Like, is there a storm drain sitting there that's going to be right in your driveway access? Is there a fire hydrant close enough that you're not going to have to add in a fire hydrant? Does the city require undergrounding all the power? What size meter is there existing? What are you going to have to add? How much does each meter cost? Are they dual meters? You need fire sprinklers. You need solar now. I mean, those are things people don't often pencil in because they don't realize that every new home is now required to have solar. And so that's a $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 per unit fee. Same thing with that new meter. That's a $30,000, $40,000 fee per unit. So the other crazy thing is the fees that they're still charging. I think you had asked about sheets. That fee, the one example, every time I post it on social media that just blows up, Sunnyvale, $110,000 park fee per unit. So if you're doing 10 units, that's $1 million in fees.
Wait. But hold on 1 second. So let's talk about Sheets. What was the Sheets versus County of El Dorado case? And
Yeah.
let's kind of apply it towards like what you're talking about here.
Right. So it was a takings case. So I can't actually remember the details of the case, but what it amounted to was that cities can't charge these impact fees. It's unconstitutional. They can't take these fees for the impact of your development because my understanding anyway is that has to be paid for by the people that are using those services already to some extent, right? And Prop 13, which is of another controversial thing, as hamstrung property taxes. So they can't charge property owners more money for the services that are increasing in cost that they're receiving. So the way that they're getting that money is by charging impact fees to new development. So the new housing is paying the bill for all the services that are increasing in cost. I mean, there probably is some impact, but I believe the way it goes is, and again, I'm not an attorney, but they have to show the direct impact. There have to be studies that actually demonstrate the impact of that development, and that's what they can charge for it. And there were studies done saying that you cannot show the impact to housing cost. In fact, it's the reverse, right? They're saying you're paying impact fees for housing, so you have to pay for affordable housing. But in fact, by building that housing, you're making housing more affordable because you're adding to supply. So why would you be charging an impact fee? And so what the developer I know did was they went in and had, I think it's Pacific Legal Foundation helped them with this, plug for Pacific Legal. And they filed a complaint with the city saying it was unconstitutional. They make you sign a form, right, when you get your entitlement that says you'll pay these impact fees. And they refused to sign it. And they filed this document with the lawyer. They were going to file a lawsuit. And the city said, okay, we'll waive the impact fees. But just on this one project, it's a special case. It's a special case because you guys decided to try and sue us, right? But I don't know what their justification was for that, but that's what they said. And so now this developer thinks, one, they don't have to pay any impact fees moving forward, but moreover, because of that case, thinks that they could go back and sue the city to get back money that was unconstitutionally charged to developers for impact. But the consequence so far has been nil. I mean, no city that I've seen has done anything about it. It's like they're waiting to get sued. And I think that when we went to Sunnyvale, we had a project down there and we went and asked them about this. And that case was pending at the time. And they said, well, we don't know if we're calculating the fees right just now. But to my knowledge, they have not changed that $100,000 park impact fee.
Wow.
What I do think I'll say is that cities are probably going to stop charging the fee and start requiring inclusionary housing. So they can get around the law by not charging a fee, but they're going to say you actually have to have affordable housing incorporated into your projects. Now, if they're doing that at a small scale, they're going to kill deals and nobody's going to build. Because if I'm in my 10-unit development or less, 4-unit development, I have to make one of those units affordable, deed restricted affordable. That's probably my profit gone.
Right. And now all of a sudden it doesn't make sense anymore. You have all of these things just stacking against you as a developer, from impact fees to density requirements to affordability requirements. And again, I'm not like opposed any other way. I want to understand what the regulations are. I want to understand that they are applied consistently and there's logic behind and rational thinking.
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, and it's not, one of the biggest problems that I see is that there's no consistency. I mean, we're constantly seeing the interpretations shift. And now this is why you have something like SB 330 as a useful tool. When you go in and submit, we did this for our recent SB 684 deal in Berkeley. You actually apply for an SB 330 as well, which locks in your regulations at the time of submittal. So they can't come back and say, okay, well, the zoning has now changed under you. We're interpreting this law differently now, or whatever. You're locked in at that, what you submitted at. So there's some stability being offered, because I think that one of the things that really killed Oakland, for example, is that eviction moratorium. If you don't know if you're going to be able to collect rent, I mean, this is one that's going on in LA right now too, then why are you going to build? If you don't have a stable environment where you can't, you can collect rent. Nobody had a loan moratorium. I mean, as far as I know, now some of these developers that had suffered under eviction moratoriums are coming back and suing cities and winning to get the money back that the city basically said, these tenants don't need to pay you. But that is a housing killer, a constantly shifting environment. You just want stability. If I'm going to have some kind of regulation put on me, I want to understand what that is before I do my project. I don't want it to have surprises because it's going to take me out.
Man, this has been such a great conversation, Matt. I love that we kind of covered everything from like, how do you look at a lot, to talk about the mistakes that people made. And we talked about some of the requirements that sometimes they don't even think about, right? It's regulations, it's the utilities as an example. I want to kind of make it real, because sometimes this type of content makes people feel like it's tangible information. When you talk about like undergrounding utilities, right, for electric, like what does that typically cost for a project nowadays?
Well, to underground all the power lines. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. This project that we're working on, I think they're penciling in like $100K to do the undergrounding. It seems low to me. I think that it could potentially be more. I mean, another one is like fire sprinklers, people coming in and converting. We're now seeing that you can actually I had a call the other day with somebody. You can put 3 ADUs into existing commercial. They have a 40-unit apartment building they're building. It has this little commercial space and they want to put ADUs in it. what was I going to say? We're talking about
I mean,
undergrounding.
I've seen people talk about sprinklers too.
Oh,
Talk about
sprinklers.
how,
That's what it is. Like if you're going through a use change, you have to bring in sprinklers. You have to potentially upgrade seismic because it's a building code issue. Yeah, the city's saying go ahead and put ADUs in that commercial space. But now you've gone from commercial to residential. That's an occupancy change under the building code. If it's a higher hazard, then you're going to have to bring it up to code. That means ADA upgrades. That means sprinklers. That means structural seismic stuff. And so that's going to be a much bigger price tag. We've seen $1 million in seismic shear bracing required in some cases because it got tripped by an occupancy change. I mean, that deal's still penciled out for them ultimately, but you have to be really careful. And again, I think that a lot of this is just assume worst case scenario. Assume you're undergrounding utility. You know, we've had projects where they said no in the beginning, and then we came back and you don't need to do anything. Don't worry. And they come back and they said, well, we need a photometric study. Oh, that light post isn't, casting enough light. So you have to replace it. Assume worst case scenario. Assume, you have a big contingency budget. So you're undergrounding power, you're replacing street lights, you're adding sprinklers. Make sure that it's in there because they might tell you no over the counter. And then when you go to submit, we were walking a project in LA with one of our friend clients, and he had built this project before we met. And he was talking about how they had 2 reviews of their fire drawings and they got their approval. And then they had a standpipe in the front of the building because it was enough hose pull distance. And the inspector came in and said, I want the standpipe in the back. And so they had to build a second standpipe in the back, and there was nothing they could do. The inspector says, I don't care. You say, well, here's the drawings that are approved. And they say, well, that's wrong. Now what are you going to do? You're going to go and fight the plan checker or try and go through all that. It's going to take forever. You just kind of are at the mercy of the inspector in a lot of cases. So those are contingencies you really can't plan for, but you just have to have money there for the second standpipe. So,
wow. I mean, that's just such a great principle in and of itself. Like, don't be optimistic when you are underwriting these projects because these things will come up and then you had to make a decision. You're like, do I try to take 3 months, 6 months to fight this thing? Or do I just do it because otherwise 3 to 6 months of holding costs, that can kill your project just that. So that's
yeah, absolutely.
the dilemma that you always face as a developer. It's like, hey, I can fight this. I can try to get on the bad side of the city, of the inspector. But what's that going to cost me? It's going to cost me 3 to 6 months of just back and forth emails. And it's a losing battle.
It's the same thing with all the new state law. It's like you can go to HCD. We had the city tell us we're not going to relax that front setback. May not physically preclude densities of this. And so they're interpreting it to say you have to hit that density. Other places say the law is saying any density you can't physically preclude. But they'll just say, well, we're not physically precluding. You could build another story or take out parking. You can design around it. Well, now am I going to take my project down to HCD and try to have them give me a ruling to make the city comply? How many months am I losing in that? How many dollars are you paying, me, the architect, to do drawings and correspondence and all that kind of stuff? I mean, you just don't want to go there. I always tell, even before state law, I said, there is a way to design around it. And that is my job. And I will get that done for you. So, best path of least resistance is always the best. The other thing I was going to say is, shameless plug, there's that density guide download. We also have, which I haven't updated in a while. I really need to do this, but it has a developer checklist or developer guide on the website that is all the things I've seen come up and bite people. So I just made a list of all the projects. I didn't put the projects in, but I just said, okay, I saw this title issue come up and bite somebody. Make sure that you have title, that you do all your title checking. Utility availability, undergrounding, all these things we're talking about right now, I've kind of put on that checklist. And probably I should update it for 2025 and I'll go back and watch this podcast and remind myself and add all these things in. So, because there's just, you get battle worn in a way. the experience of doing many, many projects. I mean, we see more projects than most developers see, right? I mean, they see the 2 or 3 projects, they see one a
Yes.
year, one every 2 or 3 years. We're seeing 30 projects a year. So everything that can go wrong, we're seeing it. And you see enough of it, you start to learn, watch out for this. Again, like a manhole that you didn't pay attention to, or a storm drain you didn't pay attention to, or a power pole that wasn't on the survey. Go out and walk the site and make sure you note everything, parking signs, whatever it is that might be in your way when you want to put a driveway there or something. So all those little infrastructure things that sit all over the site need to be documented, because they'll trip you up down the road.
And sometimes you just can't get over it until you go out there physically. So,
Yeah.
2 more questions for you, Matt. Let's just say like your daughter or my daughter want to get into your trade. They want to learn architecture.
She
Do
says
you
she
reckon,
does.
well, what should they learn first? Like, should they be going out reading legislation? Should they be going out reading the zoning regulations? Like, if you had to think about how you would start all over again, like where would you start learning?
I mean, I think it's really interesting to watch what's going on in schools right now. I mean, I sometimes joke that I would just, if I was getting my daughter started, rather than pay $200K for her college education, I would give her $200K and tell her to go buy a lot and do a deal and
I'm
help her.
with you. Yeah,
Right?
I'm so
Right.
with you on that.
But I mean, I've also, it's been pointed out to me that the college experience was very enriching. I mean, I learned about a lot of things, a very broad education. I traveled to Italy. I think that that there is something to be said for that. And ultimately I would leave it up to her. But I think there's that. And I think you're also seeing architects kind of wanting to shift to the development side. And I think that there's good and bad about that, right? I mean, mostly they do it because they want control over the design. They're designers, they want control over the design. I don't think, if you have proper social skills and intelligence, you don't need to carry a club to get the design done. You
Yes.
can wield influence and say, hey, this is what the design needs to be because of this, this, and this, and get it done that way. But you are seeing that shift. I think it's also a financial thing. Architecture, if you don't own your own practice and you're an employee, it's not great money. It's better money if you own your own practice, but maybe not as good as other professions. But there's other things that pay as well, which is that you get to design and you're doing creative things all day. You're around creative things all day. I mean, that's the thing that I really enjoy the most. But I stumbled into it myself. I was drawing and sketching, and my history is a bit checkered, my past. And I had family kind of say, we can help you get into college. I applied to one school, got in, and then, took off learning. But the schools back then taught differently. I think they taught you how to become like a Frank Gehry or something. They didn't teach you the practical skills. And I think that's shifting to some degree, like, that there is a more practical aspect of the architect's education now. And I think it also has more to do with people wanting to have an impact in reality. Like, I think that the ethic of spectacle and glorified ego design is maybe fading, and people really want to make a difference. And so housing, providing a housing, trying to keep housing affordable, sustainability, community development, I think is where socially we're kind of headed. And that's starting to infiltrate the universities to some degree. So
Wow. This is so good. I mean, I kind of tell myself all the time, I was like, if my daughter ever wants to learn something that I know nothing about, I will always tell her I'm immediately disqualified from you as your dad from giving you advice on how to become an architect. I'm gonna be like, hey, if you want to learn architecture, you gotta go learn from Matt, not me. Right?
That's a good point, though. Going to talk to architects and seeing like what do they actually do. I mean, there are books on this. Like, there are books back here somewhere about, here's a candid guide to the profession. There's a whole shelf there of books on becoming, what it really means to become an architect, what you're really doing, because you're not designing all day long.
No.
That's not it. There are a lot of misconceptions. Like, people are like, I'm not good at math. I'm not good at math. You don't need to know trigonometry or something. You need to know basic math. So
But Matt, I think that's why so many people, they trust you. Because not only do you understand the design element, but you also understand how do you balance legislation? How do you get creative? How do you understand what the product is that you're creating is something that people want? When you talked about the light and the space and the air, I mean, that's huge for the quality of life for that family that's living there. And man, I'm just like so grateful again that you came onto the podcast. And Matt, like,
No, it's
I got
fun.
one
A
more
lot of
question
fun.
for you. I got one more
Yeah.
question for you. And the genesis behind this question is because everyone has told me when I started this podcast, they're like, Kent, you will never be able to solve for affordable housing, whether that's like below market or market, doesn't matter what it is. They're like, you're never going to be able to solve for it. And I
Yeah.
always told them I beg to differ because I knew that it's only a matter of time before we collect all the pieces to the puzzle. And I view you as such a big piece of that puzzle because not only you came on, you shared such deep technical expertise, but you were so willing and open to share this with so many people. And I'm so confident someone's going to listen to this one day and be inspired by what you're doing, learn from what you're doing. Hopefully they partner with you. But if not, you probably changed one of their lives listening to you today. So the question, Matt, is why do you think affordable housing, particularly the lack of supply of affordable housing, has just like been so hard to solve for? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think it would go back to what we opened with. I think that the regulatory landscape is really a huge barrier. And I think the places that you're seeing solve it are actually places that seem to have lowered those barriers on regulation, that they can get the supply out there. I do think there is an economic cycle piece that governments cannot control. And maybe that could be solved by holding certain units in affordability at the time they're built. Right. So we still do affordable housing. We have LIHTC. We have all that stuff. I'm sure you talk about it here. But then you want to keep people building. So you need to keep incentivizing them. And I think that's one of the things that we're really struggling with. But in California in particular, I think regulatory landscape is a big part of the issue. And I think we're working towards solving that. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I think you're right. It's really interesting that you put it like we will have the right solution. I think, okay, here's another challenge that just occurs to me, is that people have to look at the information and agree on how things work. I mean, the thing that really drives me crazy is we're still having these basic arguments about supply and demand. People are like, well, that doesn't apply here, right? And how do you change people's minds about that? They're entrenched. I've been reading this book and I'm hoping that it's a much broader societal problem. People are dividing everyone into good and evil. You're seeing the sides kind of push further and further away because they're black and white or dichotomous thinking. It's a cognitive distortion. People are not divided into two groups of good and evil. Everybody falls somewhere on a gray scale, and most people probably have best intentions in mind, no matter what their politics or anything else. They really want what's best for them, their community, people outside their community. And so if we take that into account and start listening to each other and talking to each other and looking at the data, having respectful conversations, then I think we can solve the problems or get closer to solutions. But man, right now it's a real struggle because there's so much polarity. And so, I zoomed way out for you, but I think that is one of the things. And maybe these dialogues that we're having, where people can come together and even if they have different ideologies, work towards solutions. I mean, ultimately, this impacts fundamental humanity. Like people are living on the street. It's insane to me. I mean, I see so much of it here in Oakland. And they're interrelated parts, and even the market rate development impacts that. And so we are hoping that we solve that through the little efforts that we make, the incremental efforts.
Well, Matt, you made such a huge impact today, man, by coming onto the podcast. I truly believe that you have given so much today, so much information. I am just so grateful for you, man. Seriously, I'm so grateful for your time. I'm so grateful for the knowledge that you probably pass on to my daughter. And hey, one day maybe if she becomes an architect, I can give you some credit for it. That would be
Ever
pretty
call me?
freaking cool.
I don't know if I recommend it. But ever call me.
Well, Matt, if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you and where can they learn more about your architectural firm?
Yeah, I mean, the website is www.baranstudio.com, and my email is first initial last name at that address. So if people want to email, there's links on there. You can reach out. You can download all that stuff we talked about, and
Man.
I will get back to you. I
Hey, at
promise.
the minimum, everyone should be going to your website, getting that developer checklist. They should be getting on your email list. They should be following you on LinkedIn. I'm going to make sure I link down to your LinkedIn profile
Yeah,
down
that
below.
I mean, I do put a lot of stuff up there on LinkedIn. I try to keep it professional and useful information. If you want to kind of more of my wacky ideas and opinions on things, I post like my AI renderings. I make sketches of
What?
houses made out of food and all kinds of weird stuff that I post on Twitter. It's more my personality. You know, you get two different aspects on those platforms. Some on Instagram, mostly pretty pictures, right? But,
Well, Matt, I can't wait to have you back on the podcast. I want to go through like some deals with you, like live from you looking at a piece of dirt. Like, here's an example. Here's how we designed it. Here's the problems that
yeah,
we face, because that could really help a lot of people.
we should do that. I mean, now one of the things I think that was challenging here, we talk very broadly, but it would
Yes.
be great to be able to throw up a drawing and
Dude,
just walk people through the
let's do it.
process of how we developed it from step one all the way to, you know, and we could do a case study
Yeah.
and just break it down. That would be cool.
Dude, I would be so down for that. Are you kidding me? No, seriously, we're doing that. Hands down. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
All
Get
right.
in touch.
Until then, we are out. Thank you, everybody.